Airflow has become a very popular tool to create workflows. But what is Airflow and how does it work? To understand why we need Airflow, a good way to understand how it works is comparing it with tools like Cronjob, which is really common and seems to do the same job at the first glance. The main similarity between Cronjob and Airflow is that with them you can schedule tasks to run at specific times. For instance, as a very simplified example, you can write a Python code to fetch an API, do some process on that, and then store it somewhere. Then you can schedule it with Cronjob or Airflow to run at specific times every day. That way you don't need to run the code yourself manually. I'm going to show you that while Cronjob can handle scheduling tasks for us, why we still need Airflow. I will prove my point with a very simple example. But in reality, we use Airflow for more complex projects with many more dependent tasks, while Cronjob is a very good tool for running independent tasks. In this example, we're going to have 3 tasks. The first and second tasks are simulating the action of fetching data with an API. So they're not real API fetches, but a mock. The third task is responsible to combining data coming from those 2 first tasks and printing or storing it. We want this process happen every hour automatically. Let's first start with Cronjob to see how we can do that. Here I have this article ready for you, so you don't have to write all the codes yourself. You can simply just grab and copy and paste the code from this article. I'll put the link in the description. Using Cronjob is really simple. We just need to have a script. Let's call it fetch and combine.py, which includes the following code here. Let me explain the code a little bit. So the very first function here we have is fetch API number 1. It's simply simulating the action of fetching data from an API. So here we used time sleep to have the delay for the API. The delay is around 5 seconds. We have a similar action for fetch API number 2. But here, instead of 5 seconds, the delay is 10 seconds. And then we have combine data, which is the task number 3. Basically, it gets the data number 1 and 2 and then combines them together. Finally, we need to run all the tasks in order one by one. So first we have fetch API number 1, then fetch API number 2, and then when we get the data from the first one and the second one, then we combine them together and then we show the result. One very important thing here is the execution time of this script. So here I use time to grab the start time and the end time, and then I show the whole execution time of this script. Now to have it run every hour, you just need to open your cron file simply with cron tab -e. And then put this line, which is a Cronjob, in that file. For now, we don't really need to wait for the Cronjob schedule. I just wanted to show you how you can use Cronjob. For our purpose in this example, we can simply run the Python project manually. So let's do that. I go to my terminal. Here I try to create a new folder. I'm gonna call it Airflow vs Cronjob. Then go to this clear here. Simply I'm gonna use nano to copy and paste the code there. So just need to copy this name and then select the whole code, copy and paste it over here, and that's it. Now the only thing I need to do is just run it with Python. So it takes 5 seconds, the second one takes around 10 seconds. So it's executing in order. And then finally, the whole execution time is 15 seconds, which makes sense, yes? But now let's do the same thing with Airflow. First of all, you need to make sure that you have Docker installed on your computer. Now let's install Airflow. Here we have the main documentation for Airflow, and the instruction I'm going to tell you is basically based on this page. So we're going to use Docker to run Airflow. There are other ways to do that, but this is a really simple way to do that. So we just need to download this Docker Compose file with kel. I just grab this link, paste it here. And now we have a new file here, docker compose.yaml. And then we need to create some folders, these folders, DAGs, logs, and plugins. If you're using Linux, it's good to run this code here. It's basically to avoid errors like permission denied. Now it's time to actually run the Docker compose with simply docker compose up -d. Let me clear my screen, then paste it here, docker compose up -d. Here it says port number 80 is already allocated. The reason is that I already ran this docker compose on my computer. So here if I run docker ps, I'm gonna see all the docker images running on my computer. So here I have Airflow version 3 running on docker and the port is 8080. The only thing I need to do, just come here, localhost port 8080, and here I'm gonna have Airflow. Probably for the first time you're gonna see the login page there. So as the username and password, you just need to enter Airflow. Since we're using Docker version of Airflow, we don't need to install any Python module here. Now it's time to write the code. Write the following DAG and name it parallel API fetch.py. Make sure you put it in the DAGs folder. Let me explain the code a little bit. Here again, we have those 3 tasks. The first task, which has the delay time of like 5 seconds. The second, fetching API, has 10 seconds of delay. But here is the difference. We have an input called TI. With TI, we can have access to other tasks running on Airflow. So here I can say ti.xcom pool task IDs fetch API number 1. And then I can do the same thing for the second task. Here how you can have access to the data from other tasks running on Airflow. And then we combine the data together. But to define the actual task, to be able to run it on Airflow, we need to create a DAG. I create my DAG, I call it parallel API fetch. I define a schedule for it. It's going to be run every hour. We had the same thing for Cronjob. If you take a look at this syntax here, this 0 *** means that it's gonna run every hour. You can define when you want to run the task. Do you want it at specific times or every hour or every day? Every combination is possible here in Cronjob. We can do the same thing in Airflow here with schedule. When we defined our DAG, it's time to use operators to run the tasks actually on Airflow. We use Python operator, then the task ID is fetch API number 1, Python callable fetch API. Here we use the actual function we created. Here the task that is going to run on Airflow, and here's the actual function. And we do the same for the second task, and then for the third task, which is responsible to combine the data from those 2 first tasks, we simply use this function. As you can see, the most important thing here is that Airflow can give you the access to the data from other tasks running on Airflow. And that way you can keep them independent from each other, but at the same time they're dependent on each other to work. Here we say that we want to run task number 3 when the task number 1 and number 2 are ready. Don't run task number 3 before the first 2 tasks are ready. To test this, we don't really need to wait for the schedule. We can just run it manually to see the execution time. Now let's go to the Airflow dashboard and look for this DAG name in the list of DAGs. Here, if I refresh DAGs, I need to look for parallel. And here we have parallel API fetch. If I take a look at runs, you can see that for the past few hours, it was running every hour, like as we scheduled it. As you can see, it has a really good workflow diagram here that you can see how it works. So here we have fetch API number 1, number 2, and then we have combined data, which is dependent on the first 2 tasks. Now simply, instead of waiting for the schedule to run, we can run it manually. Here, we need to wait for it to be completed. Now let's take a look at the result. So here, this is the one we just ran. If I click on that, we can take a look at details. As you can see, the run duration is 12 seconds. Let's go to combine data, and here we have more detailed outputs. So here is the actual duration we calculated in the function. It's around 10 seconds, while the same execution time was 15 seconds for Cronjob. The reason that it's 10 seconds is that T1 and T2 tasks are running in parallel. Airflow can give you the access to the data for other running tasks so that you can wait for the other tasks to be completed and then use the data from those tasks. We instructed task number 3 to wait for these two to be finished. Why these two tasks are running in parallel? So in the end, the whole execution time will be the time for the longest task, which is going to be 10 seconds. In reality, we use Airflow for more complex situations with many more dependent tasks. In that case, there is no way that you can use simple tools like Cronjob. Now, you may say why we don't separate tasks number 1 and 2 and run them with different cron jobs so that they can be run in parallel. But the problem is that in that case, to run the third task, we need the result from the first and second task. But with Cronjob, we can't do that because Cronjob simply run tasks independently and can't feed the result from one task to another, and more importantly, it doesn't wait for one task to start another. In such a complex scenario, when some tasks are dependent on other tasks, Airflow comes into the scene. Of course, you can write Python code with async functions and even tools like Celery to do the same thing, but using Airflow makes it much more simpler and more efficient.